The pen hit the counter first, not thrown exactly, more like dropped the way you'd set down something you didn't want to touch. It spun once and came to rest near the edge, and the man behind the counter didn't look up from his phone when he did it. "Fill it out," he said. "Everything. And print, not cursive." Last time, someone couldn't follow simple instructions. He still hadn't looked at the man standing on the other side of the glass. Reginald Oware picked up the pen. He did it slowly, not because he was angry, though he was, but because he had learned, over 53 years of living in this country, that speed was often mistaken for urgency, and urgency for desperation. He did not want to give this man anything to read into. The form asked for his name, his address, his purpose of visit. It was a standard intake form for a private wealth advisory firm. The kind of form that existed, he had always suspected, not to gather information, but to make certain kinds of people feel they were asking permission. Oware filled it out. He pressed firmly, each letter deliberate. The lobby of Ashgrove Private Wealth on King Street West was everything it intended to be. Dark walnut paneling, frosted glass, a receptionist desk that sat on a raised platform, so that whoever sat behind it was always technically looking down. There were 2 leather chairs near the window, a low table with a single orchid, and a painting on the wall, abstract, expensive-looking, that Oware recognized immediately as a reproduction. A decent one, but still, he had not made an appointment. That was his first mistake, according to the man behind the counter, whose name tag said D. Alcott, Client Services, who had informed him of this fact twice in the first 40 seconds of their interaction. "We generally don't see walk-ins," Alcott had said. The word walk-ins shaped like something that had come in on someone's shoe. "Our advisors are by referral or prior arrangement." "I understand," Oware had said. "I'd like to speak with whoever manages your institutional accounts." That was when the pen had appeared. Oware set the completed form on the counter. Alcott took it without looking, glanced at it once, and set it face down on a pile of other papers. "Someone will call you," he said. "I was told Ms. Farquhar Reid was available Tuesdays." Alcott looked up for the first time. He had the face of a man who had decided, at some early age, that suspicion was a form of professionalism. "Who told you that?" "Her assistant. I spoke with her last week." Alcott looked at the form, face down on the pile. "He didn't turn it over. I'll pass your information along," he said, "and someone will be in touch." He reached for his phone, and that should have been the end of it. That would have been the end of it for most people. The lobby was warm in the way that expensive lobbies are always warm. Not comfortable, exactly, but designed to make the people who belonged there feel that they did, and to make everyone else feel that they probably should leave. Oware had been in rooms like this his entire professional life. He knew what they were built to do. He sat down in one of the leather chairs near the window. He crossed one leg over the other, folded his hands, and waited. Alcott watched him for a moment. Then he made a phone call, turning slightly away and lowering his voice. 3 minutes passed. 4. The orchid on the low table was real. Oware noticed. Someone was doing their job, at least. A door opened at the far end of the lobby, and a woman came through it, moving at the particular speed of someone who had been sent to handle something. She was in her late 30s, dark blazer, hair pulled back, and she carried the careful expression of a person whose actual feelings were not available for public viewing. "Mister," she glanced at the form in her hand. "Oware?" He stood. "That's right. I'm Justine. Mr. Alcott mentioned you were looking to speak with someone about an account." "Institutional accounts, yes. I was hoping to speak with Ms. Farquhar Reid directly." Justine's expression remained exactly where she had set it. "Mrs. Farquhar Reid typically meets with clients who have an established relationship with the firm." "I'm aware of that," Oware said. "I'd like to begin one." A pause. The kind of pause that is not a silence but a calculation. "Could I ask," Justine said, "what kind of assets you're looking to discuss?" "Generally speaking," and there it was. The question that was not a question. The sentence that was, underneath its professional clothing, simply, "Why are you here, and do you belong?" Oware had answered this question before. He had answered it in boardrooms and at airport lounges, and once memorably at the door of his own building when a new security guard had stopped him and asked if he was there for a delivery. He had answered it in ways that were patient and ways that were pointed, and twice in his 40s, in ways he was not particularly proud of. Today he answered it the way he had learned worked best. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a business card. He set it on the low table next to the orchid. Justine picked it up. Read it. Her face didn't change, but something behind her face changed. A small, almost imperceptible recalibration, the way a compass's needle swings when it finds north. The card read, Reginald Oware, Managing Director. Oware Mensa Capital, Oware Mensa Capital.ca beneath the name, in smaller type. Assets under management. 2-1 Justine looked at the card for one more second than was necessary. Then she looked at Oware. I'll let Farquhar know you're here, she said. She went back through the door quickly, not running, but close. Oware sat back down. He looked out the window at King Street. A streetcar went by, orange against the gray November sky. A woman pushed a stroller. A courier leaned his bike against a pole and checked his phone. Alcott, behind the raised counter, had not moved. He was looking at something on his screen, but Oware had the sense he was not reading it. 14 minutes after Justine had left, the same door opened and a different woman came through it. This one moved differently, not the careful walk of someone sent to manage a situation, but the direct stride of someone who owned the room she was walking into and knew it. Patricia Farquhar was 61 years old and had spent 32 of those years in private wealth management. She was the kind of woman who had heard everything and been impressed by very little of it, and that came through in the way she carried herself, not cold exactly, but economical. No wasted motion. She crossed the lobby and extended her hand. Mr. Oware, she said. Patricia Farquhar, I apologize for the wait. Come through. They shook hands. Her grip was firm, her eye contact direct. Oware followed her through the door, past the corridor with its frosted sconces and framed client acknowledgments, into a corner office with a view of the street below. She gestured to a chair. He sat. She sat across from him, not behind the desk, but in the matching chair beside it, which was the gesture of someone who understood that the desk was a tool, not a throne. My assistant mentioned you spoke with her last week, Farquhar said. I'm sorry we didn't have something arranged. That's on us. Not at all, Oware said. Can I get you anything? Coffee, water? I'm fine, thank you. She opened a notepad. Not an actual notepad, yellow legal pad, pen uncapped. Oware respected that. Oware Mensa Capital, she said. I've followed your firm for a number of years. The Meridian infrastructure deal in 2019, that was yours, wasn't it? Co-led, he said. We brought in 2 pension partners. Smart structure. She said it the way people say things they actually mean. You're looking to move some of your discretionary allocation, looking to explore a relationship, he said. We've been managing most of our fixed income internally, but we're at a point where we want to think about a more sophisticated external structure. Someone who can work alongside our internal team, not around them. Farquhar nodded. She was writing something on the legal pad. That's not how we usually work, she said, but it's how we should work. The firms that have the most productive external partnerships tend to be the ones where the internal team is actually strong. Weaker internal teams want someone to hand things off to. That's a different conversation. Studied her for a moment. You've turned down mandates for that reason? 3 times in the last 5 years, she said, twice politely. He almost smiled. What happened the 3rd time? The 3rd time, the client wouldn't take polite for an answer. She met his eyes. We're not in that situation here, I don't think. No, he said. We're not. They talked for an hour and 20 minutes. It was the kind of conversation that doesn't happen often, where both people are thinking rather than performing, where the pauses are productive rather than awkward, where no one is trying to close anything before the other person is ready. By the end of it, Farquhar had filled 2 pages of her legal pad, and Oware had the sense, for the first time in a long time, that he was being spoken to like a person who had something of value to offer, rather than someone whose value needed to be established before the conversation could begin. That was what it was supposed to feel like. He knew that. He had known it for 30 years. Knowing it didn't make the contrast hurt less. When they were done, Farquhar walked him back through the corridor. At the door to the lobby, she paused. I want to apologize, she said, for what happened when you came in. However that went, it's not how we operate. Oware looked at her. You weren't there. No, she said, I wasn't, which is its own kind of problem. He considered that. The man at the desk, he said. Alcott has been with us for 4 years, she said. She said it evenly, not defensively. And will be having a very direct conversation with me this afternoon. Oware nodded. He wasn't interested in what happened to Alcott, not really. What happened to Alcott was Farquhar's problem, and she seemed like someone who would solve it correctly. What interested him? What had always interested him? The burning, tireless question he had been carrying since he was 22 years old, and a vice president at his first firm had looked past him to shake the hand of a junior analyst, was why it kept happening. Not how to stop it from happening, not who to blame. Just why. What was the shape of it? What it was made of. He stepped into the lobby. Alcott was still at the counter. He looked up when the door opened and saw Oware and Farquharade together, and something moved across his face. Not quite understanding, not quite shame, but somewhere in the vicinity of both. His eyes dropped to the counter. Oware walked past him without stopping. At the glass doors, he paused. Not for Alcott's benefit, he was done with Alcott. He paused because through the glass he could see King Street again, the same street it had been when he walked in an hour and a half ago. The streetcar gone. The courier gone. The woman with the stroller gone. Everything continuing without reference to what had happened inside. He thought about his father, who had come to Toronto from Accra in 1971 with a degree in civil engineering and a letter of introduction from a professor that no one had ever asked to see. His father, who had spent 12 years with a consulting firm before starting his own, and who had kept every single client correspondence, filed alphabetically, in cream folders. Not because he was a sentimental man, but because he had understood, early, that there would come a time when someone questioned whether he had done what he said he had done, and he wanted to be able to answer without raising his voice. Oware had inherited the folders. He kept them in a fireproof cabinet in his home office in Forest Hill. He had never needed to open them, but he knew exactly where they were. He pushed through the glass doors and stepped out onto King Street. The air was cold and clean the way Toronto gets in November, that particular sharpness that comes off the lake, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed it in. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from his assistant, 3 calendar questions, nothing urgent. He typed back briefly and put the phone away. He walked to the corner and hailed a cab, a yellow one which was increasingly hard to find. The driver glanced at him in the mirror when he got in, a middle-aged man, Somali accent, talk radio at low volume, and asked where he was headed. Bay and Adelaide, Oware said, north side. The driver pulled out. They rode in silence for a block. You mind if I turn this up, the driver said, meaning the radio. A news segment, something about the city council. Go ahead, Oware said. He looked out the window as the financial district moved past, glass towers. A construction crane, motionless at noon. A man in a hard hat eating a sandwich on a concrete barrier. A woman in a long coat walking fast, looking at her phone, not looking at anything. He thought about what Farquharade had said, which is its own kind of problem. He thought she was right, and he thought she knew she was right, and he thought that mattered. Not enough, not yet, but in the direction of something. His phone buzzed again. His son this time a photo. His grandson on a tricycle in the backyard in Mississauga, wearing a helmet 3 sizes too large and an expression of total concentration. Oware looked at the photo for a long time. The boy's name was Kofi. He was 3 years old and he was already unmistakably the most stubborn person Reginald Oware had ever met, which meant he had a real chance. He typed back a single word, beautiful. The cab stopped at a light on Bay Street. Through the window, Oware could see the glass front of another tower, his own reflection staring back at him. The jacket, the gray at his temples, the face of a man who had been somewhere and was going somewhere else. He looked at himself for a moment, the way you rarely look at yourself when you're not trying to. The light changed. The cab moved on. At Adelaide, he paid and tipped generously and got out. The building he was going into was 40 stories of glass and steel, and his name was on the lease of the 22nd floor, had been for 11 years. He crossed the lobby, marble, security desk, the sound of a building working, and nodded to the guard, who knew him by name. The elevator was empty. He rode it up alone. The offices of Oware Mensa Capital occupied the southern half of the 22nd floor, with a view on clear days that stretched past the lake to what might have been New York if you were inclined to imagine things. Oware was not, particularly. He was inclined to see what was there. His assistant, Claudette, was on the phone when he came in, and she held up 2 fingers, 2 minutes, and he nodded and went to his office. He hung up his jacket and sat at his desk and looked at the city below him, all of it moving at once, the thousands of separate lives and intentions that from this height looked like something organized. Claudette knocked and came in. "How'd it go?" she said. She had been with him for 16 years and was not interested in preamble. "Well," he said, "eventually." She raised an eyebrow. He had told her when she booked his call with Farquhar Raid's assistant that he was planning to go in without an appointment first. She had told him she thought that was unnecessary. He had thought so too, probably, but he had done it anyway. He didn't always understand his own reasons for things until later. "They're a good firm," he said. "Farquhar Raid is the real thing, and the part before that?" He looked at her. "The usual," he said. Claudette had worked for him long enough to know exactly what that meant. She had her own version of the usual. She didn't say anything, because there was nothing useful to say. "Schedule a follow-up call for Thursday," he said. "Her and one of her institutional leads. And," he paused, "send flowers to her office, not extravagant. One arrangement, nothing that looks like a transaction." Claudette wrote this down. "Any message?" Oware considered. In his experience, messages on flowers were almost always the wrong move. Too much room to say the wrong thing or too little room to say the right one. But this was different. This felt like the kind of moment where silence would be misread. He thought for a moment. "Looking forward to building something worth building," he said. R. Oware. Claudette wrote it down without comment, which was her way of indicating she thought it was good. She left. He turned back to the window. The lake was flat today, the way it goes in November, gray and patient and very large. He had driven to Ashgrove that morning with no guarantee of anything, walked into a lobby designed to make him feel small, and sat down in a leather chair and waited. He had done it calmly. He had done it because he had learned, over 53 years, that the opposite of dignity is not indignity. It's the response to indignity. The moment you perform your smallness for someone who expects it, you have given them something they didn't earn and you didn't owe. His father had told him that. Not in those words. His father was an engineer, not a poet, but in the way he had lived, in the cream folders in the fireproof cabinet, in the handshakes that were always offered, and the eye contact that was never dropped. Oware thought about Alcott. He thought about the pen, dropped rather than handed. He thought about the way Alcott had not looked at him when he'd said, "Someone will call you," and the way his eyes had dropped to the counter when Oware had come back through the door with Farquhar Raid. He didn't feel satisfied about that. He had expected to feel something like satisfaction, but what he actually felt was closer to tiredness. The specific tiredness of a man who has won a version of the same argument many times and knows he will win it many more times and wonders what it would feel like to simply not have to. He opened his laptop, 12 emails, 2 that required same-day replies. He began with the first one. At 4:30, his son called. Not a text, an actual call, which meant something. His name was Bernard. He was 29 and worked in urban planning for the city, and he was the calmest person Oware had raised, which he suspected had less to do with his own parenting and more to do with the particular stubbornness of the boy's mother. "I sent you a picture of Kofi," Bernard said. "I saw," Oware said. "He's going to be a problem." "He already is," Bernard said, and Oware could hear the pride in it, unguarded and complete, the way young fathers talk about their children before they've learned to modulate. "You good? How was King Street?" "Fine," Oware said. "Good, actually." "In the end," Bernard said, "the way you say something when you know what it means and you're not going to push on it." He had learned that from his mother, too. "Come for dinner Sunday," Oware said. "We'll be there. Kofi wants jollof. Kofi is 3. "I know. He's very specific." Oware smiled, and it was the first time he'd smiled since the morning, and the fact that he noticed that was enough. After he hung up, he sat in the quiet of the office for a while. The building had emptied out around him. He could hear it, the particular acoustic shift of a floor going from occupied to vacant. The cleaning crew would come at 7. He would be gone by then. He thought about what he would tell Bernard someday. Not about today. Today was too small, too ordinary in its particulars, another story that sounded like many other stories. But about the shape of things. About the fact that the lobbies are designed the way they are for a reason, and the reason is not about security or logistics, but about the management of expectations, of who gets to want things without having to justify the wanting. About the fact that knowing this, understanding the mechanics of it, being able to name the moving parts, did not make it stop. About how to sit in a leather chair and wait and not let the waiting mean anything about who you are. His father had not told him any of this in words. He had shown him, over and over, in cream folders and firm handshakes and dinners where he did not complain, and phone calls where he did not explain himself to people who hadn't asked the right questions. Oware had spent 30 years learning how to do the same thing. He suspected Kofi, with his oversized helmet and his jollof demands, would need to learn it too. He hoped, with the patient and particular hope of a man who knows exactly how much the world can change and how slowly, that by the time Kofi needed to know it, there would be fewer lobbies designed the way they are. But he kept the cream folders. He had moved them twice, from the house in Scarborough to the house in Forest Hill, and each time he had carried the fireproof cabinet himself, and each time he had known exactly where it was in every room he had ever lived in, just in case. Not because he expected to need them, because his father had taught him the difference between expecting something and being prepared for it, and because being prepared was the only answer he had ever found to the particular tiredness of walking into a room and waiting to be seen. He closed his laptop, put on his jacket, turned off the lamp. The elevator took him down, and the lobby let him go, and the city received him the way it always had, without ceremony, without comment, without looking up from its own business. And that, on this particular Tuesday in November, was exactly enough.